People ask how I ended up leading the structural triage element for the Vetharn Combined Field Assessment, and I tell them the honest version, which is that I put my hand on a wall, and the wall told me what I needed to know. They usually want more than that, so here it is. I arrived at the Vetharn Academy's Applied Xenomaterials Laboratory on a Tuesday. I know it was a Tuesday because I had spent the Monday in transit intake processing, which at Vetharn means 4 hours of documentation review and a temperature scan, and a 15-minute conversation with a junior enrollment clerk who seemed genuinely uncertain whether my species had a standard form. I have been uncertain about many things in my professional life. The structural integrity of a compromised tunnel wall has never been one of them. The documentation, by contrast, has always been someone else's area of expertise. The Applied Xenomaterials Lab occupied the lower third of the Academy's research spire, 3 long rectangular rooms connected by sealed pressure corridors, with one additional chamber that the intake sheet called the assessment module, which was a way of saying it was the room where they put the material that was allowed to break. Walls, struts, panels, composite flooring sections, all rated for controlled failure, all instrumented, all designed, I would learn, for cadets whose natural sensory apparatus could read structural stress the way I read a pressure gauge. Drill Sergeant Vras Ohen was tharessi. 6 limbs, the lower 4 functioning as legs in a wide, low stance that suggested a species that had done most of its evolving on terrain that moved without warning. The upper 2 were used for everything else: demonstration, instrument handling. The particular kind of gesturing that I came to understand meant he was about to say something he considered self-evidently true. He had ecomorphic sensitivity distributed across 3 secondary hearing structures behind his primary eranalogs, which meant he did not experience a load-bearing wall as something you looked at. He experienced it as something that spoke. He explained this on the first morning. He explained it the way a person explains something they have never had to explain before and therefore have not yet learned to make simple. The tharessi resonance read, he told us, the cohort of 12, of which I was the only human, was the foundation of the Vetharn Structural Assessment Protocol. All load-bearing identification in the field would be conducted via primary resonance sweep. Classification of material integrity would follow the tharessi index of ecomorphic response, which was a table that assigned stress ratings on a scale of 1 to 40 based on the harmonic signature, a material produced under induced vibration. You pressed your secondary hearing structures against a surface. You listened. The surface told you its load fraction. I do not have secondary hearing structures. I have 2 ears, both primary, both positioned on either side of a head that has been pressed against a fair number of compromised walls over the course of 18 years running emergency response for the East Asia Transit Corridor. The walls had told me things, not in harmonics, in cracks. Vras Ohen looked at me when he finished the explanation. He had the specific expression of someone who has just delivered a set of instructions and is now doing the rapid mental arithmetic of whether the recipient is capable of following them. "Cadet Shack," he said, "do you have ecomorphic reception?" "No." "Any analog capacity, resonance sensitivity through any secondary structure?" "No." He was quiet for a moment in the way that tharessi are quiet, not pausing, exactly, but recalibrating, the way a precision instrument settles before it gives you a reading. The assessment protocol requires resonance identification of load-bearing elements in a simulated damage scenario. How do you intend to complete the assessment? I looked at the sealed door of the assessment module. How thick are the walls in there? He blinked. It was not an answer he had anticipated as a follow-on to his question. The wall sections are standard composite, tharessi class construction plate, 30 millimeters. The assessment involves 4 compromised panel sections in a simulated post-impact configuration. What's the impact model? Shear impact, lateral vector. consistent with a standard orbital debris strike on an exterior compartment. Pressure differential after impact. 1 standard atmosphere maintained. The scenario assumes the compartment is sealed but structurally compromised. I nodded. Then I'll read it visually. Crack propagation pattern, material grain orientation at the fracture points, load path geometry. If the wall is talking, the cracks are the translation. Vras Ohen looked at me for a long moment. He was not hostile. The drill sergeant archetype, in my experience, runs 2 varieties: the kind who needs you to fail in order to feel the protocol has meaning, and the kind who genuinely wants the protocol to produce competent people, and will accommodate a deviation if the deviation gets the job done. Vras Ohen was, I think, the second kind. He was just working out whether what I had described was a deviation or a delusion. The visual method, he said, was the predecessor to resonance assessment. It was retired from standard practice in this fleet approximately 400 years ago. What replaced it? Resonance assessment. What replaced visual assessment before resonance assessment? A pause, nothing. It was the original method. Then it has the longest operational history of any structural identification technique in your fleet. I said it without any particular energy. It was just a fact. I'll use it. He recorded something on his tablet. He did not say I couldn't. The assessment module, when they unsealed it, was about the size of 4 of my old emergency response vehicles parked side by side. The walls were standard composite, as described, a pale gray material with a faint internal grain, like compressed stone dust, which I had seen before in variations on orbital installations. The floor was intact. The ceiling was intact. 4 wall sections, as promised, showed impact damage. The panels cracked, buckled at the corners, with the characteristic asymmetric fracture patterns you get from a lateral shear load applied faster than the material can distribute. They gave us 20 minutes and a marker stylus. The task was to identify all load-bearing sections and mark the non-load-bearing sections as safe to cut. In a real scenario, cutting a non-load-bearing section to create an access point was the difference between a successful rescue and bringing the ceiling down on the rescue team. The 11th tharessi cadets spread out around the room and pressed their secondary hearing structures against the walls. They worked in the focused quiet of people doing something their bodies were built to do, not labored, not uncertain, just present. I started at the first damaged panel, in the corner nearest the door. The crack pattern told me most of what I needed in the first 40 seconds. On a lateral shear impact, the load-bearing sections are the ones where the cracks run vertically, toward the anchor points. The material is in compression, distributing the load down into the floor structure. Non-load-bearing sections crack horizontally or diagonally away from the anchor line. They're in tension relief, flexing rather than carrying. The grain of the tharessi composite ran in a slight diagonal, which I cataloged and accounted for in the same way you account for the grain in a concrete pour. It shifts the crack propagation by a few degrees, but the underlying geometry is the same. The second panel was trickier. It had a secondary crack running through a corner that suggested the anchor point on the upper right had partially failed, redistributing its load fraction to the adjacent section. I spent an extra 90 seconds on that one, tracing the crack with my finger without touching it, just following the line, reading where it went shallow and where it deepened, the way it widened at the stress concentration point, and then tapered as the material found its new equilibrium. The third and fourth panels I worked simultaneously, moving between them, because the damage pattern suggested they were in a shared load path. One was carrying for both, and the answer to which one required reading them as a pair rather than separately. The third panel's cracks were tight and fine, the kind you get when a material is under sustained compressive load and the stress is distributed broadly. A good sign, structurally, meaning the wall was doing what it was supposed to do. The fourth panel was the one that looked worse but was, in fact, the safer of the two to cut. The cracks on the fourth were wide and irregular, radiating outward from the point of impact tension relief, not compression. The wall was flexing rather than carrying. It looked like damage. It was behaving like a hinge. I've made that call in actual tunnels, not simulated ones. In the Xingang deep bore line after a pressure event, I sent a two-person team through what looked like badly damaged panel because the crack pattern said tension, and the team needed access, and there was no time to wait for an instrument read. The team made it through and back. I have never fully let go of the 3 seconds between when they entered and when the confirmation call came on the radio. But the wall had said what it said, and that is the method. I marked my non-load-bearing sections with the stylus. I stepped back. I had used 12 of my 20 minutes. I stood at the center of the room and looked at the whole picture, all 4 panels together, the way you look at a damaged tunnel section before you commit a rescue team to entering it. The marks I had made were consistent with the load path geometry. I was satisfied. Around me, the tharessi cadets were finishing. A few had been done for several minutes. One, a young one, Cohort 6 rank insignia, whose name I would learn was deathworlder, was looking at my marks on the wall with an expression I did not yet have enough tharessi vocabulary to read precisely. Vras Ohen came in when the time signal sounded. He moved through the room with a scanner, which read the surface stress data from the instrumented panels and compared them against the cadet markings. He worked efficiently. He did not narrate. When he reached my section of the wall, he paused for slightly longer than he had paused at the others. He did not say anything while he was in the room with us. In the debrief corridor, he pulled up the results on the central display. 12 cadets. A column of accuracy scores beside each name, expressed as a percentage match between the cadet's classification and the panel instrumentation data. My score was 96%. The cohort median was 93. I want to be precise about this, because I have seen the story get softer in the retelling the way stories do. I did not outscore everyone. Treth Orvan, the young one with the expression I hadn't been able to read, scored 97. 2 others matched my 96. The point was not that I won. The point was that I did not fail, and the method by which I did not fail was 4 centuries older than the method the room had been built around. Vras Ohen read the scores without commentary. He moved on to the debrief, what the correct answers had been, where the cadets who had scored lower had misread the resonance signature, what the structural lesson was. He ran through the 4 panels. When he reached the second panel, the one with the partially failed anchor point, he stopped. Cadet Shack identified the partial anchor failure and the load redistribution without resonance data, he said. He said it the way a person states a fact they find interesting, without editorializing. She tracked the crack propagation to the stress concentration point and inferred the redistribution from the paired panel geometry. He looked at me. How long did you spend on that panel? 90 seconds longer than the others. The resonance read on that panel, he said, is one of the more complex signatures in the tharessi index. Most cadets at this level require 2 passes to resolve it correctly. He looked at the cohort. Cadet Shack resolved it in 1 pass. He moved on. That was all he said about it. What happened next was the thing I have had to explain more than once. The field exercise that followed the assessment, a simulated rescue operation in a multi-compartment damaged section, requiring a team to identify the safe access route, breach the non-load-bearing panels, and extract a simulated casualty, was conducted in squads of 4. The cohort self-selected their squads. The protocol allowed for it. I was filling out my section of the squad assignment form when Treth Orvan appeared at my station. Cadet Shack, he said, in the careful standard that tharessi cadets use when they are speaking a language they have learned rather than grown up in. Our squad has voted. We would like you to serve as structural lead for the field exercise. I looked up. You've got 3 cadets who scored the same or higher than I did. We know. He held my gaze with the flat directness that I would come to understand was tharessi, for I mean exactly what I am saying. We discussed it. The vote was unanimous. I put down the form. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Then, you did not have what the room was built for. You read it anyway. We want to know how that works. It was, in my experience, one of the better reasons anyone has ever given for putting someone in charge of something. I told him I would think about it for 30 seconds, which I did, and then I agreed. Vras Ohen was at the assignment board when Treth Orvan went to register the squad configuration. I watched the drill sergeant look at the structural lead designation next to my name. He looked at it for a beat longer than the clerical task required. Then he keyed it into the record without comment and moved on to the next squad. The field exercise took 4 hours. We extracted the simulated casualty with 11 minutes remaining on the scenario clock. The access breach I called was correct, non-load-bearing, clean, no secondary collapse. Treth Orvan made the cut. The other 2 cadets, whose names were S. Seville and Orhek, and who would go on to be, as far as I know, genuinely excellent structural engineers by whatever metric the tharessi use for excellence, handled the casualty extraction with a precision that made my job look easy by comparison. I want to mention S. Seville specifically, because she was the one who caught the second problem. Halfway through the extraction, when Treth Orvan had already made the breach and we were moving the simulated casualty through the access point, S. Seville stopped. She put 2 of her hearing structures against the wall of the secondary corridor, not the panel we had cut, a different wall entirely, one that the scenario parameters had not flagged as compromised. She held still for about 4 seconds. Then she looked at me. "This section," she said, "it changed." "Changed how?" "The harmonic signature, it shifted." She pressed her structures against it again. "It was stable when we entered the corridor. It is not stable now." In an actual structural failure scenario, a resonance shift in a wall that was classified as stable on entry means one thing. The breach you just made redistributed the load. The wall you cut stopped carrying. Something adjacent picked up what it dropped. I crossed to her position and put my hand on the wall. The surface was cool. I ran my palm along it slowly, the way you feel for warmth near a fire you can't see, not touching the potential crack lines, just reading the texture of the surface for the micro-vibration that a load-bearing wall under new stress sometimes transmits. I felt it in the lower third near the floor anchor. A faint, shallow tremor, less than a millimeter's amplitude, entirely below any threshold I could have heard. "You're right," I said. "It picked up load when we made the breach. Upper third is still solid, the anchor is holding. We need to get clear of the lower section." We moved the extraction path 2 meters to the right. We completed the scenario. In the debrief, Vras Ohen asked how S. Seville had identified the load redistribution. She explained the resonance shift. He asked how I had confirmed it. I explained what I had felt in the wall. He looked at both of us for a moment without speaking. Then he wrote something in his notes. I did not ask him what. What I know is that S. Seville had caught something I could not have caught first. The resonance shift was real, and I had no organ that could read it. What I also know is that she had flagged it to me, and I had confirmed it through the older method, and together we had moved the team out of the problem before it became one. That is, as far as I can tell, how it is supposed to work. After the exercise, in the corridor outside the staging bay, Treth Orvan asked me to explain the crack propagation method. Not in a debrief context, just standing there, the way someone asks about something they are actually curious about. I explained it. He listened the way someone builds a model in real time, asking a question every few minutes, not to slow the conversation, but to keep the model accurate. At the end he said, "This is the method from before resonance assessment." "That's right. How long has it been in use?" I thought about it. The first structural triage protocols I had been trained on cited methodology going back to the construction of the original deep-bore transit lines. Earth engineering, load path geometry, crack propagation. The mathematics had been worked out in the context of bridges and tunnels and buildings long before anyone thought to apply it to orbital compartments. A few thousand years, I said, give or take. He was quiet for a moment. Resonance assessment is 400 years old. I know. That means your method is older, yes. He thought about this. He had the expression of someone reorganizing a shelf in his head to fit something that was larger than he had expected. And it works. It works as long as the material fails the way materials fail, I said. Cracks go where the stress goes. That hasn't changed. He nodded slowly. He would go on, I later heard, to add a visual cross-check protocol to his standard resonance assessment procedure, filed in his personal field notes. I have a feeling Treth Orvan is not, in the range of tharessi cadets, typical. I am not telling this story because the ending was dramatic. It wasn't. Nobody reclassified me. No ceremony occurred. Vras Ohen did not take me aside and tell me I had restored his faith in anything. What happened was, I read a wall and the wall confirmed what I already knew, and a squad of alien cadets decided that knowing it was worth something. The drill sergeant wrote it down. The field exercise went well. That is the whole story. The honest version has no better ending than the polished one, which is something I have found to be true of most things worth doing. The crack is still in the wall. I know it was patched and reset for the next assessment cohort, but the information it gave me is in a field report now, and in Treth Orvan's notes, and, I suppose, in whatever Vras Ohen decides to do with a score that landed where it landed without the equipment it was supposed to require. A crack goes where the stress goes. You only have to be willing to read it.